We're often told that evolution explains why we think the way we do. That our brains evolved to understand the world. That logic, morality, reason, even science itself are simply products of natural selection. According to this story, our minds are reliable because evolution made them so. But there's a quiet detail that rarely gets discussed. Evolution doesn't select for truth. It selects for survival. And those two things are not the same. A belief can help you survive, and still be false. A belief can be useful, without being true. A belief can increase reproductive success, while completely misrepresenting reality. So here's the question no one likes to slow down and ask. If our beliefs evolved to help us survive, why should we trust them to tell us what is actually true? Not useful. Not adaptive. But true. This is not a theological question. This is not a religious challenge. This is an internal philosophical tension inside naturalism itself. And once you see it, it becomes very difficult to unsee. Part 1. The Atheist Appeal to Evolution. Let's begin by being as fair as possible. Many modern atheists appeal to evolution not as a weapon against religion, but as an explanation of the human mind. The claim usually goes something like this. Our brains evolved over millions of years. Natural selection favored organisms that could navigate reality effectively. Creatures with more accurate beliefs survived better. Creatures with false beliefs died off. Therefore, our cognitive faculties are generally reliable. Logic, reasoning, morality, even abstract thinking. All of these are seen as evolutionary adaptations that helped our ancestors survive. This explanation feels intuitive. If you consistently misjudge predators, you get eaten. If you misunderstand physical reality, you fall off cliffs. If you can't predict cause and effect, you don't last long. So it seems reasonable to think that evolution would favor true beliefs. But notice something subtle. Evolution does not reward truth. It rewards behavior. Natural selection doesn't check whether a belief corresponds to reality. It only cares whether the resulting behavior increases survival and reproduction. And those two things can come apart. Part 2. Survival and truth are not the same thing. This is the core distinction that almost never gets examined carefully. Truth is about correspondence with reality. Survival is about behavior that works. And behavior can work even if the belief behind it is false. Imagine a primitive human hears a rustling in the bushes. One individual believes there is a dangerous predator there. Another individual believes evil forest spirits punish careless movement. Both individuals run away. One belief might be closer to reality. The other might be completely false. But evolution doesn't care. Both survive. From the standpoint of natural selection, both beliefs are equally successful. In fact, the false belief might even be more powerful. It could trigger stronger fear, faster reaction, more cautious behavior. Evolution does not penalize metaphysical error. It only rewards survival-enhancing outcomes. So the key question emerges. Why assume that evolution selected for true beliefs rather than merely useful ones? Part 3. The possibility of systematic false beliefs. Now let's push this further. It's easy to imagine isolated false beliefs. But what about systems of belief? Could an entire worldview be false, and still adaptive? Absolutely. What matters is not whether the worldview is true, but whether it produces behaviors that keep organisms alive. A species could evolve a deeply distorted picture of reality, as long as that distortion reliably leads to survival-enhancing behavior. Evolution does not correct for metaphysical accuracy. It does not check logical coherence. It does not test philosophical consistency. It selects blindly. This creates a troubling possibility. Our cognitive faculties could be tuned for survival, not for truth, even in a systematic way. And if that's the case, then something strange happens. The very reasoning we use to affirm evolution would itself be a product of a process that does not care about truth. Which raises a deeply uncomfortable question. Part 4. The evolutionary defeater problem. Here's where the tension sharpens. If natural selection does not aim at truth, then why trust the beliefs produced by a naturally selected mind, including beliefs about evolution itself? This is what philosophers sometimes call a self-defeater. If evolution explains why we believe things, but not why those beliefs are true, then the belief in evolution becomes just another survival strategy. It may be useful. It may help us predict phenomena. But usefulness is not the same as truth. So the problem isn't that evolution is false. The problem is that evolution undercuts confidence in any belief being true, including belief in evolution. The knife cuts both ways. Part 5. But false beliefs would get you killed. At this point, many people object. Surely false beliefs would be selected against. If you consistently believe false things, you won't survive. But this objection misunderstands the issue. The question is not whether all false beliefs are harmless. The question is whether beliefs need to be true in order to be adaptive. And the answer is no. What matters is whether the belief produces the right behavior, not whether it accurately describes reality. Evolution favors reliable outputs, not accurate representations. A mental shortcut, a heuristic, a simplified model. All of these can be wildly inaccurate and still highly effective. In fact, from an evolutionary standpoint, simplification and distortion are often advantages. Truth is expensive. Precision costs energy. Accuracy is slow. Evolution prefers fast, cheap, good enough solutions. Not philosophical accuracy. Part 6. Science quietly assumes what evolution cannot guarantee. Now something interesting happens. Science depends on the assumption that our cognitive faculties are aimed at truth. Not just survival. Not just usefulness. Truth. Science presupposes that our reasoning tracks reality. Our observations reveal how the world actually is. Our logical inferences preserve truth. Our mathematical structures correspond to the structure of the universe. But evolution does not guarantee any of this. Evolution guarantees that our ancestors survived long enough to reproduce. That's it. So science stands on a foundation that evolution itself does not supply. This doesn't mean science is false. It means science is philosophically unsupported by a purely evolutionary account of the mind. Science assumes truth. Evolution explains survival. And those are different categories. Part 7. Logic is not an adaptation. Consider logic. Logical laws are not physical objects. They are not behaviors. They are not survival strategies. The law of non-contradiction does not hunt prey. Modus ponens does not help you find food. Logic governs truth-preserving inference. But evolution does not select for truth-preserving inference. It selects for behavior that works. So why should a mind shaped by evolutionary pressures be trusted when it claims? This conclusion necessarily follows from these premises. Evolution does not care about necessity. It does not care about validity. It does not care about contradiction. And yet, every atheist argument relies on logic being objectively binding. That assumption arrives quietly. But it does not arrive naturally from evolution. Part 8. The same problem applies to morality. The exact same tension appears with morality. Evolution can explain why we feel moral impulses. Why cooperation helped groups survive. Why empathy increased reproductive success. But explaining why we have moral feelings is not the same as explaining why moral claims are true. Evolution can explain why we believe certain actions are wrong. It cannot explain why they actually are wrong. And yet, moral arguments are constantly made with the assumption that some actions really are wrong, regardless of survival advantage. That assumption exceeds what evolution can deliver. Part 9. Consciousness and first-person experience. Now consider consciousness. Evolution explains behavior from the outside. It does not explain subjective experience from the inside. The feeling of understanding something. The experience of grasping a truth. The sense that a belief corresponds to reality. These are not behaviors. They are experiences. Evolution can select for organisms that act intelligently. It does not explain why those organisms should experience truth as something distinct from mere utility. Why does truth feel different from convenience? Why does falsehood bother us? Evolution does not predict this. Part 10. The quiet difference between useful and true. At this point, the distinction becomes unavoidable. A belief can be useful and false. A belief can be adaptive and inaccurate. A belief can promote survival while misrepresenting reality. And evolution cannot distinguish between these. So when someone says, "Our brains evolved to understand truth," they have quietly smuggled in something evolution does not provide. They have assumed that reality is structured in a way that minds can know. And that minds are aimed at truth, not merely survival. That assumption does not come from evolution. It comes from somewhere else. Part 11. This is not a God of the gaps. Let's be clear. This is not an argument that says, evolution can't explain X, therefore God. That would be shallow. This is a question about coherence. If your worldview says, reality is purely material, minds are products of blind selection, beliefs are tools for survival, then you must explain why truth matters at all. Why we should trust reason. Why logic binds us. Why evidence convinces us. Why falsehood feels like failure. These are not gaps in science. They are tensions in worldview. Part 12. Why this makes people uncomfortable. This question is unsettling because it forces a slowdown. You can reject theology quickly. You can dismiss religion emotionally. You can mock metaphysics. But this question does not go away. Why should a survival-driven mind be trusted with truth? Not utility. Not success. Not reproduction. Truth. There is no easy answer. And that discomfort is not an accident. Conclusion. The question that refuses to disappear. Evolution explains how we survived. It explains why our ancestors lived long enough to reproduce. It explains why certain behaviors persisted. But it does not explain why our beliefs should be true. And yet, every argument against God assumes truth. Every appeal to science assumes truth. Every critique assumes logic. Every discussion assumes meaning. Those assumptions are doing more work than evolution can justify. This doesn't prove God. It doesn't settle theology. But it leaves us with a quiet, unavoidable question. If evolution shaped our minds for survival, why do we keep trusting them for truth? That question doesn't demand an answer. It demands reflection. And once you've seen it, it never really lets you go.